This is your story.
Doesn't it feel like your negative thoughts sometimes grow into a massive elephant, stomping all over you? Today, we're going to explore how to effectively deal with those persistent negative thoughts that quietly eat away at your mind, especially the ones that seem to get stronger the more you try to suppress them, the kind that don't take over when you think about them, but when you try not to, okay? This cycle is known in neuroscience as the thought suppression paradox. There's a thought occupying your mind, a disturbing one. Just thinking about it makes you uncomfortable. So naturally, you try not to think about it. But here's the irony. Trying not to think about something is, in itself, a form of focused attention, right? And that places a heavy load on the regulatory systems of your prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the brain's executive control center responsible for decision-making, attention, impulse, regulation, and emotional balance. When overloaded, especially by efforts to suppress thoughts, its ability to maintain cognitive and emotional stability begins to break down. Psychologist Daniel Wegner illustrated this with what's now known as the white bear experiment. Participants were told just one thing: don't think about a white bear. And guess what happened? They couldn't stop thinking about it. Wegner explained it this way: to suppress something from the mind is to send a signal directly to the mind's radar. We now know that the more mental resistance we apply against a thought, the stronger its neurological imprint becomes. A 2012 study found that individuals who tried to suppress obsessive thoughts showed hyperactivation in the anterior, cingulate cortex, and the orbitofrontal cortex, two brain regions that play a central role in thought regulation and emotional control. In essence, trying to escape a thought is actually fueling it with even more cognitive energy. In some of the cases I've worked with, I've seen people shake their heads aggressively, even bang them against the wall just to stop a single thought. Because at that point, the thought isn't just mental anymore. It turns into physical stress, sometimes even escalating into a full-blown panic attack. As the philosopher Epictetus once said, it's not the events themselves that disturb us, but our thoughts about them. And sometimes those thoughts grow even more powerful than the actual reality. Today, we're going to talk about how to break that cycle. So, is it actually possible to escape this mental trap? Yes, absolutely. But first, you need to understand this. These distressing thoughts are not reflections of your values, your character, or your true desires. Okay? Most of the time, they're just neurobiological tricks. Your brain is playing on you. I'm not going to give you specific examples right now, because if your mind is prone to obsession or intrusive thinking, any example I mention could start echoing in your head, and your brain might begin processing it as if it were your own reality, right? That's exactly why I don't recommend reading detailed posts on internet forums, blogs, or watching certain videos. Because if your mind leans toward obsessive thinking, it tends to latch on to those examples with a quiet, what if this is me? And that can lead you to doubt yourself, even in areas you've never questioned before. These distressing thoughts often show up under certain themes. They might revolve around sexuality. They might challenge your religious beliefs. They could raise moral doubts or bring up confusing questions about yourself or others. Okay? For some, it shows up as a need to repeatedly check something out of fear they've done it wrong. For others, it takes the form of intrusive thoughts about people they love, thoughts they never imagined they could have. And most of the time, it all begins like this. A single thought enters your mind. Maybe for just a second. Maybe in a dream. Maybe as a simple question, and then you start spiraling. What if I think it again? What if I actually want it? What if I lose control and act on it? You begin replaying it over and over, okay? Anyone who has experienced this knows it well. Thoughts don't gain power just from their content. They gain power from the meaning we attach to them. Carl Jung put it this way: what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. That's why the solution isn't suppression. It's facing the thought, but without assigning it, meaning it's noticing, but not identifying with it. And most importantly, it's remembering you are not your thoughts. Before anything else, there's something important I need you to hear. If you're experiencing intrusive thoughts or obsessive doubt, it doesn't mean you're weak. In fact, it's often a neurological reflection of being deeply conscientious, careful, and emotionally attuned. These kinds of thoughts are most common in people who are trying to avoid making mistakes. People who are hyper-aware of their moral compass, who don't want to harm others, and who strive to stay on the right side of their own values. So if you're experiencing distressing thoughts related to sexuality, religion, or moral values, that doesn't make you deviant. It doesn't mean you're drifting away from what matters. In fact, it often means the opposite. You care about these things so deeply that your mind registers even the possibility of crossing a line as a threat. That's exactly why the thought lingers. Not because you're careless, but because you're deeply committed.
Don't forget to subscribe.
Psychoanalyst Eric Fromm once said, "The conscientious person is often the one most burdened by their own conscience." And that couldn't be more true. Intrusive thoughts don't usually take root in the minds of cruel or careless people. They show up most often in the hearts of kind, well-intentioned individuals who are overly preoccupied with being flawless. Albert Ellis, the founder of cognitive behavioral therapy, pointed to the same truth. The greatest mistake your mind makes is confusing a thought with your character. Who you are isn't defined by whether you have a thought. It's defined by what you do with it. That's why it's often enough to ask yourself just one question. Despite this thought, what do I choose? If your answer is honesty, respect, faith, or kindness, then it's not the voice in your head that defines who you are, but the direction of your life. Remember this, honest people fear their thoughts. Cruel people obey them. Your mind is extraordinary. You have the capacity to think about anything you've seen, heard, felt, even something triggered by just a few words. And you don't just think about these things, you combine them, reshape them, and generate entirely new possibilities from them. Your mind holds an almost limitless creative potential. That's powerful, but also dangerous, because we're capable of thinking anything. Every possibility can show up in our minds. That's why we need to draw a clear line here, okay? Just because you think something doesn't mean you want it. A thought appearing in your mind doesn't mean you've endorsed it, accepted it, or acted on it. There's a massive difference between a thought and a reality. If people acted on every thought they had, the world would fall into complete chaos. This simple truth reminds us of the essential difference between the mind and the external world. Right now, a thought might enter your mind. It could be disturbing, shameful, or frightening. But if you hadn't given it special attention, if you had simply let it pass, it might have faded away in just a few minutes. But you're trying to be perfect. You want to be free of mistakes, clean, untouched by flaws. You want to live ethically, to do what's right, to stay true to your faith. But if you're going through a difficult time in the background of your life, even silently, your mind becomes more vulnerable to these intrusive thoughts. And then one of those thoughts shows up. You don't even want to think it. But because of your honesty, your sensitivity, your emotional depth, you focus on it. You start asking yourself, how could I even think something like that? And then the doubt begins, do I really believe this? Could I have actually wanted it? That tiny thought, once barely noticeable, starts to grow fueled by your attention, because attention amplifies mental energy. The moment you zero in on it, you give it space to take root. Up to this point, you start constantly monitoring yourself. Am I thinking it again? Did it come back? Is it still there? And the more you check, the more you begin to create what wasn't really there to begin with. The thought in your mind grows, not because it's real, but because of your efforts to suppress it. A 2005 study from Stanford University showed that fighting unwanted thoughts doesn't make them disappear. It actually makes them more persistent. The brain labels a thought you're resisting as a threat and continues to track it like something dangerous. So what do you do next? You start building logic around it, creating internal narratives. Like, if I were really that kind of person, I would have done this. I wouldn't have felt that, and so on. This becomes a form of mental compulsion, and sometimes it's accompanied by physical behaviors, shaking your head, hitting it against something, or trying to distract yourself with actions in an attempt to stop the thought. These responses might bring a brief sense of relief, but what happens next? The thought comes back because you're still fighting it. There's a quote from Spinoza that perfectly fits this moment. The mind, even when it believes it is free, is often wearing its heaviest chains, because that internal battle isn't freedom, it's obsession in disguise. Thoughts are not reality. And if they were real, they would have already turned into actions by now. Let me ask you a simple but powerful question. If you were truly the kind of person who wanted those disturbing, frightening thoughts, the ones you're terrified to even think, wouldn't you have acted on them by now? Look around. There are people who do the very things you're afraid of. They don't just think, they act. So why is it that you're only thinking, not acting? That's where your core self comes in. your internal operating system. Because when someone is truly going to act on a behavior, they don't obsess over it for months. They don't spiral in anxiety. They simply act. But you're not doing that. And that says everything, because you have values. You have beliefs, moral boundaries, and a deeply rooted framework that defines who you are. That framework begins forming in childhood, shaped by your genetic makeup, your family environment, the cultural codes you've absorbed, and the inner structure you've built within yourself. All of it works together to form your character. But then, at some point, maybe during adolescence, maybe in a particularly difficult moment in your life, a single question shows up in your mind. What if I really think this way? What if this is who I truly am? And from that one question, the fear cycle begins. The thoughts start spinning. The doubts multiply, and your need for control starts to grow. So let me ask you again. If you were truly going to act on these thoughts, wouldn't you have done it by now? Then why are they still only in your mind? Why have they remained just thoughts and nothing more? The answer is actually very clear. These thoughts don't align with your core self. It's like a virus has entered your mind from the outside. Ideas that don't reflect who you are, thoughts that have nothing to do with your true character, but they show up and take over, pretending to be you. And all they bring is fear. You're not just afraid of the thought, you're afraid of the fear itself. And this is the moment when the boundary between thought and reality begins to blur. But remember this, a thought is just a thought. It's not reality. If those thoughts truly defined you, they would have already become actions. Freedom doesn't come from trying to control your thoughts. It comes from observing them without giving them meaning. Okay? As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, the only thing that can harm you in your mind is the meaning you assign to it. And he was right. Your thoughts do not define you. You don't have to follow them. You don't have to fight them either. You just have to let them pass, like clouds in the sky. Earlier, I told you not to fight your thoughts. But if you're not going to fight them, then what should you do when those disturbing thoughts show up? Because they don't just arrive in your mind. Sometimes your body reacts to your heart rate spikes, your stomach tightens, that familiar wave of anxiety rolls in. And right in that moment, when the unsettling thought starts to settle in your mind, you find yourself trapped in a cycle. Your first instinct is often to seek reassurance. You start asking, I'm not that kind of person, right? Maybe you turn to your mom, a close friend, or a therapist, and when they say, no, of course not, that's not who you are, you feel a wave of relief. It's as if the thought doesn't belong to you anymore. But you know what happens next? That relief is temporary. A few days later, the same thought returns. This time louder, stronger, and harder to ignore. Seeking reassurance is actually a form of mental compulsion. The brain reaches for quick fixes to reduce anxiety, but these fixes, over time, make the anxiety worse. This pattern is well documented in the cycle of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Research shows that reassurance seeking triggers a short burst of dopamine, providing temporary relief, but in the long run, it lowers the brain's threshold for tolerance, making it more sensitive to future distress. That means the same sentence that once gave you peace for a whole day now only works for a few hours. Over time, you become dependent on those words, and the more dependent you become, the weaker your self-trust gets. What you need? Ayas and Timori reassurance. You need inner resilience. Okay? That's why I'm telling you this. You need to stop seeking constant reassurance from the people around you. Every, not answer is just a temporary bandage. But the real wound won't heal until you face the thought itself. One of my clients once asked me, is it possible that I actually did this? And of course, at first, I gave the explanation that helped calm them down. But the second and third time, I didn't give the same answer, because what they needed was not another layer of reassurance. They needed to face a thought without running, without suppressing it, but also without giving it more power. And that's exactly what you need to let the thought come and go. To observe it without questioning it, without needing confirmation, without resistance. As a philosopher Epictetus, who spoke through the Socratic method, once said, when a thought disturbs you, pay attention not to the thought itself, but to your response to it. Because it's not the thought you truly need, it's the meaning you attach to it that starts to suffocate you. If you don't break this cycle, you may unknowingly slip into a kind of psychological addiction. You keep asking others, I'm not like that, right? I wouldn't do that, would I? But over Chimi, each answer you get loses its effect more quickly. And in the end, you trade your freedom for uncertainty without even realizing it. The way to deal with your own thoughts isn't by fighting them. It's by making them irrelevant, by shifting your focus. Imagine there's someone in your life you don't like, maybe someone who even disturbs you. If you constantly argue with them, what happens? Without realizing it, you give them a central role in your life. Someone who doesn't even deserve a fraction of your time or energy suddenly occupies a large part of your mental space. But there's another way, isn't there? It's about ignoring that person, not talking to them. Choosing instead to talk to Emma, Sarah, or the people you actually enjoy being around. You shift your focus to your phone, your work, or a song you love. In other words, you don't fight, you disengage, because wherever your attention goes, your mental energy flows. Intrusive thoughts work the same way. The more you fight them, the more they grow. But when you notice them, accept them, and then consciously redirect your focus, they begin to lose their power. When a distressing thought enters your mind, your old habit says, fight it, push it away, get rid of it. But now you're building a new system, one that says, yes, you're here, but I'm not taking you seriously. You're just a thought. You're not real. If you had the power to take over my life, you would have done it by now. But you haven't. You failed. And once that internal dialogue is in place, it's time to shift your focus. So what can you do in that moment? You can watch a movie, call a friend, go outside and take a walk. And almost immediately, your mind will whisper, but you can't focus. You need to fix this first. That's when you make a conscious decision. No, not right now. This may be a problem in my mind, but I'm choosing to engage with something else in this moment. It's not easy, not at all. It's like working out. At first, it feels heavy, like you're lifting 20 kilos with your mind. Your thoughts ache, your emotions resist, but you stop being controlled by the weight. You start controlling it by refusing to give importance to the thought and choosing to replace it with something else. You begin to train your brain's focus muscles. Okay? In neuroscience, this process is known as cognitive restructuring and directed attention. Research shows that with consistent practice, the brain begins to rewire itself, particularly in regions like the anterior insula and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This rewiring reduces the emotional weight that a thought can carry, making it easier to disengage from its grip. And this is exactly where Viktor Frankl's words come to mind. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. You are now making your choice in that space. You're choosing redirection over resistance, and that is the true gateway to mental freedom. People who have struggled with intrusive thoughts for a long time often begin to avoid anything that might trigger them. They distance themselves from certain people, conversations, places. Even a single word in a sentence can feel like too much. In psychology, we call this avoidance behavior. It's when mental anxiety turns into a physical form of self-protection. At first, it feels like it's helping. It gives you the illusion of safety because avoiding the trigger feels comforting at first. But then that comfort begins to isolate you from life. You start building a mental safe zone. But that zone keeps shrinking. And one morning, you wake up and realize even the things that once brought you joy now feel out of reach. Okay? This is where the second step comes in. Once you've stopped fighting the thought and learned how to redirect your focus, the next step is to face what you've been avoiding. But here's the crucial point. Facing your avoidance is not the same as testing yourself. Healthy exposure means allowing yourself to encounter triggers in the natural flow of daily life. Not forcing situations just to see how you react. It's about meeting the fear where it shows up, not chasing it down to prove something. For example, a word you come across in a newspaper, a scene in a book, or a sentence you hear during a conversation might trigger discomfort. But staying in contact with those triggers sends a message to your brain. I can be near this thought and nothing bad happens. The mind begins to neutralize through exposure. This technique is scientifically validated. It's called exposure and response prevention, one of the most effective methods for managing obsessive thoughts. But testing is something entirely different. Testing means deliberately engaging in a behavior you would never normally do just to check whether your thought is real. Pushing yourself to see, do I actually want this? Circling around the thought on purpose. or triggering something you're afraid of doing. Only throws your mind into deeper confusion. Testing doesn't extinguish intrusive thoughts. It fuels them. Because after every test, the mind starts searching for new proof. And that only pulls you deeper into the cycle. That's why you need to tell yourself, I can face the things I ban avoiding and I can handle them. But I will never try to test them. Because hidden inside testing is a subtle form of panic. And panic doesn't erase a thought. It amplifies it. Let Kierkegaard's words come to mind here. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. When you face what you've been avoiding, you stand right at the threshold of that door. But if you try to test it, it's like clawing at the edge with your bare hands. So be careful. Healthy confrontation makes you stronger. But testing traps you in a mental illusion, okay? We often treat intrusive thoughts and obsessions as purely psychological patterns. But the truth is, the tendency toward these kinds of thought loops can sometimes be part of a genetic legacy. If someone in your family, your mother, father, uncle, aunt, or cousins has experienced similar struggles, it may suggest that you're more vulnerable to the same mental cycle. This doesn't mean it's your destiny, but it might mean you have a predisposition, and having a predisposition doesn't make you guilty. It simply means you may need to be more mindful. In such cases, therapy is powerful, but when appropriate, medication can also play a key role in restoring balance. So please don't interpret what you're going through as a sign that you're a bad person. The thoughts that enter your mind do not define you. And don't forget, if you truly wanted to act on something, you probably would have already done it. But the fact that you're here, reading these words, carefully listening and reflecting, that alone tells you something. That action isn't in your core wiring because people don't obsess over what they truly want to do. They just do it. If what we've talked about here has helped you, I'm truly glad. But if it hasn't been enough, please don't label yourself as broken. Not being able to break this cycle on your own doesn't mean you're weak. Asking for help can be one of the most conscious and courageous steps you can take, because some problems can't be solved alone. Not with books, not with videos. And that's not a failure. That's what it means to be human. A long-term study from Stanford University found that individuals experiencing obsessive thought cycles showed over a 75% improvement when they participated regularly in psychotherapy, especially cognitive behavioral therapy. This means the process is manageable. It can be improved. You just have to stop believing that you have to walk through it alone. There's a quote by Albert Camus that says, "Man's greatest victory is to keep walking even when darkness is within him." That's your journey too, okay? And don't forget, if you keep walking, that darkness might just turn into light. If this video lit even a small light in your mind, if you heard a sentence that made you think, so I'm not the only one, then I'm inviting you to stay connected, to keep creating content like this and reaching more people. I'd truly appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes a single sentence can become someone else's healing, right? Maybe this is the first time you've said, I'm finally speaking up. And maybe this is the very first step that breaks the cycle. You are not alone on this journey. Thank you for being here, beautiful soul. Until we meet again, take good care of yourself.